Pokemon has become the highest grossing media franchise of all time, but back in the early 2000s, Pokemania was starting to fade, and Game Freak couldn't shake the feeling that losing their longtime fans would spell disaster for both the games and the franchise itself. If they wanted Pokemon to survive, they would need to reconnect with the fans who grew up in Kanto without alienating those beginning their journeys in Hoenn. Their solution? Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen. 2 decades have passed since their release in 2004, and after all this time, should you revisit them? 6-7 joke! This is on you, big dog. Or are they better left abandoned to the past? Welcome to Under the Spotlight. It's the summer of 2003. The sun is shining, a cool breeze is blowing, and you just got home from Toys R Us with your brand new copy of Pokemon Ruby. Or Sapphire. I don't judge. Okay, maybe a little. So you grab your GBA, pop in a fresh pair of AA batteries, and embark on your journey through the waterlogged region of Hoenn. And as you struggle to decide whether it's going to be Trico, Mudkip, or Torchic, it's always Torchic. To help you defend Professor Birch, Junichi Masuda and his team back at Game Freak let out a collective sigh of relief. Their gamble to reinvent the series had worked. The team had experienced considerable success through the 90s with Generations 1 and 2, but by the time the Game Boy Advance launched in 2001, the original titles were beginning to show their age. Pokemon no longer felt as cutting edge as it used to, which meant that the next generation of players likely wouldn't be drawn to play outdated games on aging hardware. Masuda knew the series was in desperate need of modernization, which was a thought that had been plaguing him since the release of Gold and Silver. The second generation had received significant praise on release and was celebrated in many regards, particularly for expanded gameplay, the introduction of time-based events, and the addition of the Pokegear. But despite all the improvements his team made, a lot of fans still saw this generation as the beginning of Pokemon's decline, something Masuda couldn't help but take personally. Gen 2 marked the first time he'd ever taken lead as director, a responsibility he did not take lightly, and even though Gold and Silver sold tremendously well, he couldn't help but focus on the feeling that mainstream media was slowly pushing Pokemon out the door. So if pop culture was going to try and push them out, he decided that they were going to push back twice as hard. Ruby and Sapphire launched on November 21st, 2002 in Japan, and in North America on March 19th, 2003, after what Masuda calls the worst development cycle he's ever endured. The jump in hardware from the original Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance was near astronomical and caused their workload to quickly become overwhelming. But beyond the difficulties of adjusting to new hardware was the doubt that latched onto them like a disease. The stress of both personal and public expectations weighed so heavily on them that Masuda even had to go to the hospital at one point due to stomach issues. But failure was little more than a nightmare because Generation 3 was an overnight phenomenon. In fact, it had reached such a significant level of success that by the time Ruby and Sapphire were released in North America, the games had already sold more than 3.5 million copies in Japan alone. The franchise's staying power was undeniable, yet Masuda couldn't help but notice the same withered complaints that had haunted Gold and Silver 3 years before. Except this time, he noticed the criticism wasn't as critical. Everyone was happy to see the series move forward, and especially happy about the improvements to gameplay and user experience, but longtime fans couldn't help but feel overlooked when it came to everything they cherished about the game. They felt that in the rush to prove their critics wrong and usher in the next generation, Game Freak was leaving behind everyone that had supported them since Pokemon Red and Blue. This didn't sit right with Masuda. He had hoped the third generation would be everything both old and new fans wanted, and for the most part, it was. But there was something critical missing that was causing their longtime supporters to feel underwhelmed and overlooked. That's when he realized the players miss their Pokemon. People had spent years crafting their ideal teams and completing their Pokedex to suddenly find that all those years of progress were completely useless. What's worse is that the Hoenn Pokédex was so restrictive that a grand majority of Gen 1 Pokemon were impossible to obtain, and worst of all, due to hardware differences between generations, the Game Boy Advance was incapable of interacting with the Game Boy Color, making direct migration completely impossible. All they wanted to do was continue their journey with their favorite Pokemon from Kanto, but for so many people, that small ask was virtually impossible. Masuda knew the unfortunate reality was the engines were so completely different that even if they wanted to, there was no way to move a Pikachu from a copy of Pokemon Red or even Crystal to Ruby or Sapphire. But what if they weren't so different? What if the original games were built on the Ruby and Sapphire engine? What if they rebuild the originals from the ground up? Brothers, say left! The single greatest games to ever exist on God's gorgeous green earth, Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen officially launched in Japan on January 29th, 2004 and North America on September 9th that same year. And in case you missed it the first time, are the single greatest games to ever release! Despite releasing so close to Ruby and Sapphire, Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen were met with an overwhelming amount of support and sold over 1 million copies during the release week in Japan alone! Again! FireRed and LeafGreen performed so incredibly well that they would go on to become the second best-selling Game Boy Advance games of all time, and it's easy to see why. The games recreate Kanto with an incredible accuracy, almost mirroring the originals one-to-one in a style I like to call scrunched, because it looks exactly like Ruby and Sapphire, just squished. But aside from the updated visuals were many noticeable improvements like better enemy AI, the addition of the running shoes, new content, the Versus Seeker, a brand new post. But most importantly, the entire original Pokédex got the full Generation 3 treatment, meaning updated sprites, brand new movesets, and natures and abilities for the very first time. It's crazy to think that there was a time before running shoes. If you've never played the original games before, it might be difficult to fully grasp just how big of a leap this was from Red and Blue, but if you have, it makes even more sense why then President Tsunekazu Ishihara said, "We don't feel this is a remake at all. Rather, this is a new game," because despite appearing like a simple reskin of the original games, the changes are genuinely such a significant step up that FireRed LeafGreen really do kind of feel like original standalone releases. Growing up, I played a lot, and I mean a lot, of Pokemon Yellow, so I'll never really truly be able to see the first gen games as outdated or bad in any way, but I can still admit that they've aged and are far from the best objective way to introduce yourself to Pokemon. The original games are filled with so much charm and, for me, so many memories that the Sacred Triumvirate is always gonna hold a special place in my heart. But FireRed LeafGreen kinda changes the game. One of the first things you're going to notice with the remakes is how much the enemy battle AI has improved. Wild Pokemon encounters aren't really impacted in this regard, even though they are still technically a battle. Every mon had their sprite updated and received the all-inclusive Gen 3 treatment with the addition of natures and abilities like I mentioned like a couple seconds ago, but outside of this, they honestly remain the same. You encounter the Pokemon, capture it, or put it in the dirt. But when it comes to battling other trainers, especially gym leaders, your rival, and the Elite Four, my brother in Arceus, it's so freaking good. Now, I'm not gonna say it's the best thing in existence, because it's definitely flawed, and there's still enough RNG brain rot involved that it honestly can sometimes still feel a bit too dumb. But for the most part, especially the trainers that are supposed to be quite skilled, they actually do have some level of intelligence. This isn't applicable to every NPC in the game, of course, because I highly doubt youngster Ricky is going to employ the same strategies as Dragon Tamer and leader of the Elite Four Lance, but for those monumental battles, you can sometimes feel like you're actually battling another real person. The best example I can point to are the battles you have with your rival, starting with the one on Route 22. He'll almost always open with a few sand attacks before resorting to damaging dodging moves, which is a big improvement over the seemingly random decision-making of generations prior. For them to actually have some understanding of a strategy was kind of cool to experience for the first time, and even when I went to replay it for this video, it was a nice thing to see for a game that's so old. But even if the AI was made to pick the perfect move every time, I don't even know that I'd notice, because I play the games like an absolute mongoloid. I don't know what it is about the Game Boy era of Pokemon games, but I love running through them with only one Pokemon from start to finish and challenge myself to achieve the final evolution as fast as possible. So more often than not, my Pokemon is so over leveled that I just outspeed and OHKO everybody anyway. For example, in the playthrough I did for this video, my buddy Steve was a Venusaur by the time I faced Misty.
Except his name is George in the footage. But his name's not George in my game. I have no idea where this footage came from, but it's the exact same stuff that I recorded with Steve. You think I'm kidding? This is me and my boy Steve. I have no idea where George came from.
But I digress. Most people, unlike me, are normal and choose to play the game as such, normally. But if you would like to live life in the fast lane, I highly recommend trying to play the game like this and picking one Pokemon to beat the entire game with from start to finish. I usually recommend a starter or one of the first few Pokemon you encounter, like a Pidgey or a Rattata, because I personally like to make use of another addition to these games as soon as I possibly can: effort values. I don't want to overwhelm you with the brutal details of the system, because although it is simple by design, there's a level of depth that can make it feel more daunting than it should be. The reason I bring it up now is because this system is arguably the biggest and best improvement made in FireRed LeafGreen. Whenever I play Pokemon Yellow, no matter how many times I play it in my lifetime, the Pikachu I had when I was 5 is going to be the same Pikachu I have when I'm 50, because nature's abilities, EVs and IVs, didn't exist back then. That means that every time you start the game over or catch a new Pokemon, you're getting the exact same Pokemon as long as it's, Abra, Pikachu, Caterpie, so on and so forth. This isn't the case in FireRed LeafGreen. Every single Pokemon you catch is guaranteed to be different from the last, and their battling ability dramatically different from one to another, especially once you learn how to fully utilize the effort and individual value systems. This system is where the core of FireRed LeafGreen's renewed experience resides, and I feel it goes largely underappreciated by so many fans of the original games, myself included, but I can't really blame us. For the longest time, Game Freak went about hiding the system behind cryptic blurbs from NPCs or word of mouth from players, which I feel only did damage to the early days of the competitive battling scene. I didn't even learn that EVs and IVs exist until the release of Black and White, when internet connectivity and general accessibility was starting to become more mainstream. But especially during the days of Generation 3, it was an incredibly hard thing to just discover for a lot of people. I even remember giving up Pokemon for a time because I would spend hours crafting what I thought was the best possible Pokemon team, only to be mollywopped by everybody I matched with once I took them online. I couldn't figure out why my Pokemon were so strong among my friends, but blew absolute chunks competitively. And especially in the case of FireRed LeafGreen, with how they were supposed to be the grand reinvention of the games that started it all, I find it a weird decision to rely exclusively on word of mouth for a system that was supposed to revolutionize the series. But at the end of the day, FireRed and LeafGreen do exactly what they set out to do. Fans had been longing to revisit the cities and landmarks that had become like a second home, and in that regard, I don't think it can be argued that they're anything short of perfect. I still remember the first time I played Pokemon LeafGreen. The absolute sense of wonder I felt in that moment is something I will never forget. Even as I started a new game for this video, I couldn't help but feel the same things I did when I first played it back in 2004. There's just something special about FireRed LeafGreen that leaves me nothing but excited for the people about to experience them for the very first time on Nintendo Switch. If that's one of you, my advice to you is do not rush. These games can be challenging at times, and there are moments where you'll inevitably get lost. Just enjoy the time that you have with them and cherish the rare opportunity you have to relive them as if it were 2004 all over again. And to those of us returning to Kanto after all this time, let's not forget what made these games so incredibly special in the first place: the unwavering sense of support, friendship, and community. If you can't already tell, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green are games that I absolutely recommend you experience one way or another, but I could never recommend that someone pay the prices that some people are asking for a physical cartridge. With their release on Nintendo Switch, however, that obstacle has been completely removed. There's never been a better time to pick up these games on official hardware and play through what I consider to be the best experience ever offered in a Pokemon game. But holy fuck shit, some of you need to grow the fuck up. Oh, you can emulate the game? No one fucking cares. Nobody is asking you to participate in this release the same way no one is asking you to drown yourself in your own piss. Yet here you are. If you don't like the Nintendo Switch release for whatever fucking reason, that's still no excuse to belittle and berate someone over Pokemon. I thought we were over this when the lot of you stopped whining about Legend ZA, but apparently not. And because it seems the message wasn't received the first time, I'm just gonna play the clip.
At the end of the day, what we're talking about is inconsequential. Games are a privilege, not a right, and talking down or treating somebody like they're lesser simply because they disagree with you about Pokemon is embarrassing. This is just a video game, and to quote former President Scott the Woz, it's not that deep. Telling someone their life has lesser value or mocking their financial situation, that's fucking pathetic. Let me be clear, this smoke isn't for everybody. There's a large part of the gaming community that can happily coexist whether they bought the game or not. If that's you a real one. Right now, I'm talking to the poison. You know who you are. Grow up. Get off the floor and onto your fucking feet. You're drowning in a puddle of your own creation. If a video game makes you this angry, the game isn't the problem. You are.